Just 17 days after launch, a significant amount of staff at Wildlight Entertainment has been laid off. 17 days is still just the very beginning of a live service game cycle, but most titles at this point are still reacting to feedback and adjusting balance and trying to build the momentum that they have to build in order to survive. They're not usually scaling back at this point, so when layoffs happen this early, it naturally raises the questions about what's really happening behind the scenes. Now, a recent article from PC Gamer has been released and it comes with some pretty devastating news actually. The article reads as follows: 16 days after Highguard's launch, the studio has laid off most of its staff. What I particularly wanted to cover in this article is a statement made by the level designer Alex Grainer, or as I should say, the previous level designer, because he unfortunately has been laid off. And it reads as follow here on a message from his LinkedIn page. Unfortunately, along with most of the team at Wildlight, I was laid off today. This one really stings as there was a lot of unreleased content I was really looking forward to that I and others designed for Highguard. And this particular statement really speaks to the potential of recovering a lot of the goodwill from the consumers who might have felt wrong by the product that they ended up receiving. It's very clear that the layoff staff wanted to prove the customers wrong in the long term and deliver a product worth the consumer's time and in the end money, of course. However, with the layoff, it's unclear whether we will get to see any meaningful updates in the future that could salvage the broken promises from the roadmap and future expansions. With that being said, it's unclear how far along they are with future content updates, but I could imagine that we at least see a few major expansions to the game before it eventually or possibly could conclude the tale of Highguard with their current downward facing player base. But as it stands right now, the player base is clearly not enough to sustain the game, and with major streamers not covering the game anymore as they did on launch day and during the following week, I don't imagine this really going particularly well for Wildlight Entertainment. Now, another thing I wanted to cover is it's a statement further in the article, and this makes the news even more striking as to how it contrasts with the messaging before Highguard's launch, where lead designer Mohammed Alavi, I hope I'm pronouncing his last name right, he expressed to PC Gamer in an interview shortly before launch that honestly we don't need player counts to be super huge in order to be successful. Alavi said at the time, what we're really hoping for is a core group of fans that love us that will allow us to grow. But this statement is very hard to actually realize in real life because building a core audience takes time, and just 17 days is barely enough time for any live service game to really settle and let alone organically develop a loyal community. These games depend very much on momentum and on updates landing with the consumers and making these balance adjustments. But this process isn't just going to happen in 2 weeks or just slightly above 2 weeks. So when layoffs happens this early and in the life cycle of a game, it creates an uncomfortable disconnect. If the strategy was truly long-term growth around a core community, the game needed runway. The speed of these cuts suggests that expectations, whether financial or engagement based, may not truly have aligned with what was communicated publicly. And in these live service games, that perception really matters just as much as how numbers themselves do. And now, another article that has actually been published just yesterday as of recording this is by IGN. And if we just quickly switch over, I have it pulled up right here on Twitter or X. What they do is actually pretty much glaze the game for what it's offering, and I don't really know what they're seeing in this game, but the fact that they cover the exact same things that people are finding lacking and very boring, as well as not at all unique, is kind of worrying to me. And here we have this article from IGN. If you just scroll down a bit to the particular section that I wanted to cover, we have the statement here. Similar to the small but mighty number of weapons, Highguard's 9-player characters called Wardens will feel quite familiar to anyone who has spent time in hero shooter like Overwatch or Apex Legends. Each character fulfills a specific magic-based fantasy like Atticus, the flying lightning bolt chucking DPS machine, or Kai, an ice magic user who can turn into a massive frost demon and is unmatched in his ability to defend an area. Following in the tradition of most hero shooters, they all have two abilities on a cooldown plus an ultimate that can be used a few times per match. And now they mentioned the selection of heroes as something very familiar to people in this kind of hero shooter or these paced games. But in my opinion, I just don't see the appeal of playing the same types of heroes in different games. And shouldn't they be unique? Otherwise, why would you even play the other games than those already established as successful? It just doesn't really make sense to me. Why would you switch from, as they mentioned, Overwatch or Apex Legends or Marvel Rivals or any of these big kind of established games? Why would you even attempt to try new games if what they're offering is just the same heroes, just with a new skin or just slightly different looks to them or feels to them in terms of their abilities? It just doesn't really make sense to me. Another part of this article is what they say right here. It's no big surprise that Wildlight has built a shooter that immediately feels great, and as this new studio is made up primarily of people who worked on Titanfall and Apex Legends. Whether I was sniping enemies at a distance or getting in close for a cheeky submachine gun kill or shotgun kill, combat was crisp and immediately reminded me of my days sweating it out in Apex Legends lobbies. The selection of weapons is quite small, but just one of each type available, but the upside of that slim arsenal is that it feels incredibly well tuned, and when you start to find higher rarities, you'll see little modifiers and buffs randomly rolled on each that slightly tweak things like reload speed, magazine size, or stability. Now, this is something that I've heard myself being echoed around the various players playing and covering it. And I do feel like this is something to be expected of devs from the aforementioned Titanfall games, but only having one of each type of weapon is not an appealing offer to me at least. And in my opinion, I think they should at least have created more weapons for each type and given the opportunity to the players to pick and choose which kind of archetypes they want to run. It just feels very much like an illusion of choice with only having the opportunity of picking one kind of submachine gun or one kind of sniper rifle or one kind of handgun or any kind of rifle for that matter. And it just comes off as insincere in a way of giving the players one of each type of weapons and then you're forced to play this kind of submachine gun. If you don't like the feel of this type of submachine gun, it just feels wrong because then you have to switch to another gun that you just overall dislike. And now beyond the layoffs, the launch itself didn't exactly help this game. But to understand how we got here, we have to look back at how the launch actually played out. And when Highguard launched just under 3 weeks ago, the reception was, let's just say, very mixed in mediocre reviews overall and a very rough start on Steam. And definitely not the kind of first impressions you want to have for a brand new live service game. On launch day, it peaked at just above 97,000 concurrent players, which on paper might sound very good. It's just that numbers alone don't tell the whole story. This game very quickly was hit with massive review bombs. Now you can argue for and against that, but some will say no genuinely good game gets review bombed without any reason for it. Others might argue this was a retaliation effort for its trailer placement at the Game Awards. Now, it's recently been revealed that they didn't really have any say in the placement of their trailer, but in the end, having their placement did end up causing some kind of damage to the brand. But either way, when you look at how the Steam scores tanked from the early reception, it really quickly become reality, and that's incredibly hard to recover from. And their launch strategy certainly didn't help, in my opinion. The launch stream turned into a massive info dump, not exactly a great marketing move. There was just way too much information thrown out there, and people had to sift through all this information before pretty much even having to try their hands at the game. But gameplay-wise, there are also some structural issues. The map just feels too big, but the implemented mounts do help bridge the gap a bit, but just not enough to fix that initial feeling of emptiness or downtime during the gameplay. The discrepancies in fun between wardens are also just very broad. The characters like Mara or Scarlet feel genuinely fun to play, while Redmayne just feels straight up boring in comparison. The game also struggles with its identity. It feels like a jack of all trades kind of experience. It tries so many different things that loses its edge and uniqueness. And when you have moments like Condor firing ultimates that feels like a literal copy of characters in Valorant, it just doesn't help the argument that Highguard brings something truly new and unique to the table. And putting all these together, the mixed reception, the low Steam score, the review controversies, the early layoffs, and gameplay inconsistencies, it's clear that a lot has to change for Highguard if they want even a shot at turning things around. And rebuilding player trust after a start like this isn't impossible, as we have seen with probably the prime example of this being No Man's Sky. But it just requires a very clear path and strategy. You've got to be cutthroat and very streamlined in your decisions, no distractions, and no new ideas that could end up hindering the process of this development. But right now, it just all feels very uncertain. But anyway, that is all I have to say at this time. I really hope they pull through in these troubled times because more competition is always great for the consumers. But right now, they just need to focus on their own project and making it the best that it can be without trying to overpromise any features or any new mechanics or maps or things that could change the game in a significant way. They got to be very streamlined in their creative processes and innovate on things that they know that players will find appealing to them. I hope you enjoyed this video and I'll see you next time.